All right, so let's grab the manual and we'll go to step 1. So step 1 shows us that we need to put the gantry over the base, and then there's 4 bolts that go on each side, which are the M565, and that's these here. We're going to need the large wrench. So we're going to grab the gantry, the upper portion, and hopefully you guys can see here, but there's a little cutout here and on the other side, and the rail should slide right in there. But it is a pretty snug fit, so that's good. Now before you do insert this, make sure that your main cable here that comes from the back is not all twisted up. If it is, flip this thing around until it's untwisted and then insert it into the base here. And also if you need more wire, you can lower the Z-axis here so you can have a little more cable to play with. But yeah, it's pretty simple and it's kind of holding itself pretty much right now. But yeah, our bolts are just going to literally go through here and then into the frame. And there are 2 of them. So we just got to line them up and tighten them up. Alright, so I haven't tightened them all the way. Let's go to the other side. And we'll do the same thing here. Now obviously guys, when you put this in, you got to put the motor to the back here. So the back is where this other motor is and the heated bed cable comes out. And I don't think you'd be able to do it any other way. Alright, so we're going to snug these up nice and tight. Go to the other side. And that's good right there. So yeah, it feels really solid, and the way they designed it here, it's quite good because the channel is holding it very nicely from rocking back and forth, so it's actually very stable. So quite clever design there. So another thing that's quite important is you want to go around and tighten all the frame bolts. So there's a lot of bolts everywhere and you want to check them, make sure they're tight, because a lot of times they'll be loose and you want to tighten it all up so it can be nice and rigid. And the ones that are actually quite important are underneath. And maybe you guys can see them right here. There's 4 of them. So you want to definitely make sure that these are nice and snug. And mine were actually quite loose. And so these 4 bolts keep the Y-axis from moving around. At least it is on the other Ender-3s. On this one, they have another brace here which helps with it not flexing back and forth, which 2 bolts go from here. So yeah. This printer is really thought through. This is what I like about Creality, is their engineering and overall designs work very well. Alright, so that was step 1. So step 2 is installing the power supply, this guy here, and you are going to need the M4 25 volts. And if you are looking at the printer from the front, it goes here on the right side, right behind this rail. I'll raise this up a bit. So here you can see there's a couple holes. We do need to pull out this power cord here that's tucked inside, if yours is also. But yeah, the supply is literally going to sit like this, and these 2 holes here are going to line up with the threads on the casing of the power supply. So we're just going to grab our bolt, go through the hole, and then line it up with the power supply. Same thing down here. So yeah, this part is pretty simple. Snug it up, and this is what it should look like. So yeah, it just lives here right behind this rail here, and this is where your main power button is. And there's the cord coming out of it, which we'll plug into the other side, and we'll do that at the end when we plug everything in. So yeah guys, as you can see, so far everything is pretty simple. So the third step here is to install the display. So we are going to need the M510 bolts, and the display simply mounts right here with the 2 bolts into the frame. But I want to go ahead and plug in the plug here that comes from underneath, and it's like this colored one here, and I think it plugs in into EXP3, which is sitting like this, the closest that way. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and we can go ahead and install the display. Snug it up, and that looks really good right there. Now I think this wire here should probably go underneath the printer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and this make more sense. Stay under. Alright, so for step 4 we got the spool holder. If you're looking at the front, it goes on the left side, right over here on this channel. And so if we look at the bracket, you guys can see that it kind of just clips on and then holds on to the channel itself. So yeah, we're just going to put it in on the top and then go down with it, and there is a nice little rubber foot here that sits down, and that's where it lives. So it's not really a sturdy thing, but it does move around in there quite easy and wobble, but it doesn't really matter. Once you put your spool on here, it's going to weigh it down and it should be fine. So this piece here will go towards this way, since our spool needs to go here and then feed up to the extruder. Now the interesting part about this thing is that it does fold over, so a little easier maybe to store, or even if you wanted to kind of be on an angle or something, you could use it that way. So yeah, pretty cool. So for step 5, they want us to put the glass build plate back on, and then step 6 is connecting all the wires. So let's go to the wiring next. So this main wire that goes up here that was pre-assembled already. We have quite a few plugs here to plug in. And it's not very difficult to know where they go because they're all labeled. So there's a zip tie here we need to cut. So the larger plugs are for the motors and the smaller ones are for the end stop switch and the filament detector. So the filament detector actually has a label here that says what it is, and that's this thing right here. So let's go ahead and plug that in right there. And then the extruder motor right here has an E on it with the large plug. We're going to plug that there. And then we just have two more wires, which is the X larger one and an X smaller one. So the larger one here is for the motor. And this is the X axis motor. And then we got the X end stop switch. And I don't know if you guys can see, but it's inside there. And this plug goes in there. It's a little bit hard to reach, but there's quite a bit of room in there. You just got to stick your finger. But yeah, the smaller plug and then the larger one here for the motor. And that is all of the wires up here. Now if we go down, we can see the Z axis motor. And there is a wire here, again the larger plug with a label that says Z, and you want to go underneath the printer, and so the Z plugs in here. And then we got another Z that's a smaller, and that's for the Z axis end stop switch, which is right here, and that plugs in right under here. So we're pretty much done, but we got one more main plug to plug, which is the power plug, and that's actually underneath the printer. So we can see the main plug coming from the power supply, and the other part of it is right here coming out of the control board. I think the power supply wire also needs to go underneath the channel, just like that. Now there are a couple clips here that hold wires. I'm going to take one off and use one for this side and then use the other one on the other side of the plug, and that way we got a nicer, cleaner kind of routing there. So yeah, that looks good right there. And here's our display cord here, so you can kind of play around with it and tuck it all in nicely. Yeah, that looks pretty good there. So one thing that I haven't pointed out is that we got these nice large rubber feet, and there are 6 of them. Alright, so let's flip it back around. And that pretty much concludes the assembly of the printer. Now we do need to put our bed still back on here, so let's go ahead and peel off the protective layer. And the reason we haven't had it on there is because we don't want to mess it up as we're putting it together. And plus you don't want to take off this film until you're done with everything so you don't scratch it or get grease on it. Yeah, all we got to do, go to the back, slide it in, and then these clips here in the front will clip over it, and that's how it's held. So yeah, pretty nice. And I like how the printer has such a large volume of printing area, but it still feels compact, which is quite interesting how they achieved this. Now, before we plug it in and power it on, we need to do a couple things. The first thing is we need to check all of our rollers and also check just the whole printer, all the bolts, make sure everything is together, the belts, that they're running true on their pulleys and things like that. So this part is not too fun, but quite necessary to check the printer for adjustment, make sure everything is as it should be, because if something's off, you want to correct it now and not, try to figure out what's going on later. So we're going to start with the bed, and what we need to do is check the rollers underneath. So first we'll move it around and see what it feels like. Actually feels pretty good. I do feel a little bit of imperfection, so what we need to do is get underneath here, and this might be a little bit hard to show now. Well, maybe not. So yeah, you guys can see there's 3 rollers here. So 3 of them are adjustable, and then there's 3 more on the other side that are not adjustable. Well, actually this middle one is adjustable on the other side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to check them by just turning them. So this one is adjusted good. So what you want is you want it to just kind of do a burnout as you're moving it around in one spot. So let's go to this one. So this one's too loose, it's not doing anything. And then this one here is a little too tight. I can barely turn it. So I'm going to grab my wrench and I'm going to loosen this one just a bit by turning the eccentric nut. Alright, and as I loosened it, feels much better. And actually the middle one now started to grab, which is kind of interesting. And this one's good too. So they actually all feel really good now. Now you might have to, go back and forth and adjust it. The whole point of this is that you can spin the little wheel here pretty easily in one spot, all of them. So ultimately what you want is you want it to be as loose as possible, but not wobble back and forth. So like our bed's not wobbling, but the wheels are quite easy to turn in one spot. So let's see what kind of motion we got. Oh yeah, that definitely made it really nice. So now it's smooth as butter. So even though it looked like that we didn't really need to do much, because I turned one of them a little bit, that changed everything and it made it perfect now. So if you feel any kind of vibrations or kind of like catching as you move it, that means something is wrong and it's most likely too tight. So try to make it as loose as possible without having any wobble, and usually that works out really good. So while we're over here, we're going to check our belt, make sure it's running true on the pulleys on the front here and the back where the motor is. So on mine, everything looks good, but if you do need to adjust it, there's 2 bolts on each side that you can loosen and move this bracket, offset it a bit, and plus you can tighten the belt if you need to do that. All right, so for the next part, let's go to our X-axis, and again, mine doesn't feel right, and there's a really large little catch moment right here. So the rollers are definitely way too tight on this thing. So I'm gonna flip the printer around, and maybe you guys can see a little better, but here we have the adjustment on the bottom, then 2 stationary on the top here. Let's grab our wrench and start loosening it. This was extremely tight. Okay, there we go. So I got it loose, but now it's too loose. So let's go the other way. All right, and that feels pretty good. I can turn the roller in one spot, and now it's nice and smooth. Look at that. So yeah, guys, it's not complicated. Just, a little bit of adjusting. And this is more important than anything else. You want to get your printer as smooth and as everything aligned as possible. And that's what's going to make the biggest difference in print quality. Now we do also have the Z-axis here with this lead screw here, and this could be quite important too, and we want to make sure that our Z-axis also is smooth. So mine seems to be okay, but we do have rollers here that ride around the channels, and we want to check those. Now on mine, it's way too tight on this side, way too loose on this side, so it looks like I just need to loosen this side, and I think that side might tighten up. But our eccentric nuts are on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and loosen this side. Alright, so that got loose, so I'm able to spin the rollers now. Let's see what happened here. Okay, so these tighten up just a bit also, and that one feels okay too, but I think we need to tighten up this one just a bit. Alright, so I think I'm pretty happy with everything here. So the other part that's quite important is the power supply, and on the back of it here we can see that there's a little opening, and this is where you're going to set your voltage. So depending on where you live, you're going to set it to 230 or 115. So mine is set on 230 right now, so I need to switch it. Now I'm on 115, so you definitely don't want to forget and check that before you plug in the printer into the power cord.